Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Davis. Michelle Ann Corner was born on December 15, 1966 in Iowa. By 2008, she was a 41-year-old mother of 3 living in Des Moines. Her divorce from her husband, Randy Davis, was nearly finalized, and she had taken steps towards starting anew. Michelle had moved into her own apartment and obtained a restraining order against Randy. This marked a significant turning point in her life. However, the years leading up to the divorce were tumultuous for the family. Michelle, described as friendly and adventurous, with a passion for motorcycles, she was a respected and authoritative secretary at a trucking company. On September 11, 2008, Michelle, having finally escaped the burdens of her troubled marriage, colleagues noted the change in her demeanor since her separation. Michelle left work around 4:30 p.m., but her newfound freedom was short-lived. Just after she left, 911 operators began receiving calls about an accident on Interstate 235. A Mercury Sable was found upside down, with Michelle, still wearing her seatbelt, unconscious in the driver's seat. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but sadly couldn't save her. Michelle Davis was pronounced dead. After arriving at the scene, the police initially believed that Michelle lost control of her vehicle, resulting in an accident. However, they quickly ruled out this theory the next day. Forensic experts determined that Michelle's death was not caused by injuries sustained during the rollover, but rather by a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet was extracted and sent for analysis in the hopes of identifying the perpetrator. As they waited for the results of the ballistic examination, local authorities took precautions to ensure public safety. They considered the possibility that Michelle was a random victim and that the shooter might strike again. To address concerns, the police increased patrols in the area. Once it was clear that Michelle's death was not an accident, detectives revisited the crime scene to search for clues. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no results, as they found neither the cartridge case nor any other evidence to aid in the investigation. The police initially thought Michelle was the victim of a car accident, so the traffic services cleared the site, potentially destroying any evidence. Despite this, the detectives remained hopeful that they could still find answers by reviewing traffic camera recordings. These recordings often help solve cases, and this one was no exception. The investigators started studying the recordings from the traffic cameras, focusing on the one closest to the crime scene. They rewound the recording to the time when people started calling 911. After half an hour, they found what they were looking for. The video showed Michelle's car lying upside down, but the footage was of poor quality, resembling a slideshow with separate pictures and intervals between them. Michelle Davis's family was shocked when investigators revealed her death was not an accident. Her father, Michael Lee Corner, was particularly devastated, having lost another daughter, Cheryl Sue, in 1965, at just 1 year old, and now dealing with the loss of a second child. Michelle's family described her life as having changed significantly in recent times. Despite having no financial problems, they suspected that her husband, Randy Davis, might have been involved in her death. Their divorce was almost finalized, and Michelle had filed a restraining order against Randy. This revelation led the investigators to consider Randy as a potential suspect. Meanwhile, another detective spoke with Michelle's colleagues at her workplace and discovered that she had been in a close relationship with a man named Matt Jorgensen, who was also a colleague. This new information added another suspect to the investigation, as the police sought to understand the complex circumstances surrounding Michelle's death. According to Michelle's friend, Michelle and Matt Jorgensen had mutual feelings for each other. However, since Michelle was going through a divorce from Randy Davis, they kept their relationship private, only sharing it with close friends and colleagues. When investigators spoke with Matt, he openly discussed his relationship with Michelle and provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the day of her death. He claimed They never had any arguments or fights. The police verified his alibi, and he was subsequently eliminated as a suspect. The ballistic examination revealed that the murder weapon was a .22 caliber rifle, and experts determined that the shot was fired at close range. Given that the crime occurred on the interstate, the police believed the shooter was likely in another vehicle that was driving alongside Michelle's car. This new information led to the emergence of a new suspect in the case. The police received a tip from Michelle's insurance company that her brother Todd was seeking payment, raising suspicions of a life insurance-motivated crime. A detective visited Todd's house to investigate. When the detective started asking Todd about his whereabouts on the day of Michelle's death, Todd realized he was a suspect. He explained that he was in a different part of the city at the time of her death, and that the family was struggling financially. Todd said he had turned to the insurance company because he needed the money to pay for Michelle's funeral. The police verified Todd's alibi and found that he was not in the area where Michelle was killed. This ruled him out as a suspect, but Todd provided information that led the police to investigate another suspect, Josh. Josh was the son of Randy from a previous marriage and was an adult at the time of Michelle's death. A Marine named Josh had recently returned home from the Army when a tragic event occurred. Michelle was fatally wounded in a car incident, and the police considered Josh a suspect due to his military background. As the investigation continued, a woman reported witnessing something on Interstate 235 on the same day and time as the incident. A witness reported seeing a red Ford F-150 pickup truck driven by a white man in a baseball cap who was driving erratically, swerving between lanes, and appeared to be chasing someone. This new information led investigators to re-examine traffic camera footage, focusing on finding a red pickup truck in the area. The footage confirmed the witness's account, showing a red pickup truck following Michelle from her workplace. Although the footage was not clear enough to reveal the driver's face or the truck's license plate, further review of other camera recordings revealed that the truck was consistently following Michelle's route, staying close behind her as she approached the location of her death. This evidence suggested that the perpetrator likely fired the fatal shot from the truck while driving. Detectives investigating Michelle's death had several suspects in mind and soon discovered that her husband, Randy Davis, owned a red pickup truck. They immediately visited his house, but found only his son, Josh, who was a Marine trained in handling weapons and had access to his father's vehicle. Josh claimed that on the day of Michelle's death, he went shopping with his sister and then spent the evening at home watching TV. However, detectives found Josh's alibi suspicious. According to Josh, the divorce proceedings between Michelle and his father were challenging, partly due to Michelle's demand for half the house's value. Josh also stated that his father arrived home around 5:30 p.m. that day. The conversation with Josh revealed that he might have had a motive for the crime, as he was upset about Michelle trying to take part of his inheritance during the divorce. This led detectives to view Josh as a potential suspect with a possible motive. Meanwhile, the police canvassed shops and gas stations along the route from Michelle's workplace to the crime scene, hoping to find additional surveillance footage. Their efforts paid off when they discovered crucial footage at a store just a few miles from Michelle's workplace. On September 11, 2008, the day Michelle died, a red pickup truck arrived at the store at around 4 p.m. The truck was registered to Randy Davis. The police needed to determine who was driving it that day. Security footage showed the driver getting out of the truck and entering the store, but the poor video quality made it impossible to identify whether it was Josh or Randy. The man disappeared from view for a while, then reappeared, made a purchase, and left the store. It's worth noting that this all happened at 4 p.m., while Michelle left work at 4:30 p.m. The police continued to analyze the footage and found that the pickup truck returned to the store several times over the next 30 minutes. but the driver didn't get out of the truck on these subsequent visits. The truck's final appearance near the store coincided with Michelle leaving work. Despite being unable to identify the suspect, the police tried to contact Randy Davis again. This time, he responded and came to the police station. The investigators informed Randy of his rights and made it clear that he was not under arrest. Randy agreed to cooperate and answer some questions. When asked about his activities on September 11th, Randy mentioned that he was going through a difficult divorce with his wife Michelle, with whom he had been married for 17 years. Randy claimed to have worked as a carpenter and was at work on the day of the incident. When questioned about his return time, Randy initially hesitated before stating that he arrived home at 3:45 p.m. However, this statement contradicted the surveillance footage and Josh's testimony, which indicated that Randy arrived home around 5:30 p.m. Randy further stated that he didn't leave his home after 3:45 p.m. and was home alone until Josh joined him to cook dinner together. However, this information conflicted with Josh's testimony, which stated that he was already home when Randy arrived. The alibis of Randy and Josh were intertwined, and investigators realized that one of them was not telling the truth. To test Randy's reaction, investigators informed him that Michelle had died from a bullet wound, not from injuries sustained in a car crash. Randy showed little reaction to this news, pretending to be surprised and lowering his eyes. When investigators asked him when he last saw Michelle, Randy requested a lawyer, which ended the conversation. The investigation was lacking in crucial evidence, including the weapon used to take Michelle's life, so Randy Davis was released. On September 15, 2008, Michelle's family and friends gathered to pay their respects at her funeral. Randy Davis attended the ceremony, putting on a show of grief, including bursting into tears. The investigators were working hard to find the answer. Unexpectedly, Josh Davis, Randy's son, walked into the police station with his lawyer and offered to make a statement. According to Josh, his father's car was parked in the driveway when he returned home from his sister. On September 11, 2008, Randy Davis committed a horrific act of violence. His wife, Michelle, had filed for divorce and was seeking part of the property in the divorce proceedings. Randy was unable to accept this and decided to take drastic measures. According to his son Josh, Randy had been planning this act of violence and had even told Josh that he was going to do something that would make Michelle regret it. Josh tried to stop his father, but Randy was determined to carry out his plan. Randy parked his red pickup truck outside the store where Michelle worked and waited for her to leave. He drove past the store several times, making sure not to miss the moment. When Michelle left work, Randy followed her and eventually found the right moment to strike. He rolled down the passenger side window and fired, shooting Michelle. Josh's testimony was crucial in the investigation, and the police were able to arrest Randy Davis based on the information he provided. The incident was also captured on the store's CCTV footage, which showed Randy's truck parked outside the store several times before the shooting. Randy Davis was initially charged with first-degree charges for the death of Michelle, but he made a deal to plead guilty to second-degree deprivation of life in exchange for a reduced sentence. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 2010. The case of Jody Sanderholm. Jody Leanne Sanderholm was born on September 26, 1987, in Arkansas City to parents Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. As the third of three children, she had an older brother named Jason and an older sister named Jennifer. From an early age, Jody had a passion for dance, which played a significant role in her life. However, she also prioritized her education and excelled in her studies. Jody's academic achievements were impressive, earning her one of 4 valedictorian spots in her graduating class. During her high school years, she was an active member of the National Honor Society, received recognition as a Kansas State Scholar, and was awarded the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award. Additionally, She was captain of the Arc City High School dance team for 2 years and an instructor for both Arc City Dance and the Universal Dance Association. After graduating, Jody attended Cowley College, where she studied pre-pharmacy and was part of the Cowley Tigerette dance line. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jody drove to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45 a.m. After the rehearsal, she planned to return home. However, when her mother, Cindy, called her cell phone multiple times, Jody didn't answer, which was unusual for her. Being a responsible and communicative person, Jody always kept in touch with her family, and her mother's repeated calls went unanswered, leaving her with a sense of unease. Cindy left work early to check on Jody, who should have returned from dance rehearsal. But when Cindy arrived home, she noticed Jody's car was missing, which only added to her anxiety. Entering the house, Cindy realized Jody was not there. Her dance uniform, which she usually washed after rehearsal, was nowhere to be found. The shower stall was dry, suggesting Jody hadn't showered after dance class. Cindy soon discovered that Jody had not contacted her father or sister Jennifer either. Jody had a noon appointment, but she didn't show up. Cindy and Brian began calling Jody's friends, hoping someone had seen her, but none of them had since the morning rehearsal ended. The dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game that evening, and Jody, as the choreographer, wouldn't have missed it voluntarily. However, she didn't show up. By 6 p.m., Cindy and Brian were still unable to locate Jody, so they contacted the police and reported her missing. The sheriff's office quickly created flyers with Jody's description and began investigating her last known whereabouts, issuing an APB on her vehicle. On January 6th, Jody's best friend, Lori Leglighter, whom she had known since high school and had danced with, provided crucial information to the police. The two friends had also attended Cowley College together, where they studied dance. Lori told the police that she had left her job at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m. on Tuesday, January 2nd, and had noticed a light blue car driving by the restaurant multiple times as she departed. Lori noticed a car following her on her way home, which made her feel uneasy. To test her suspicion, she turned onto different streets, but the car behind her kept following. Frightened, she drove to the local police station and parked, hoping the stalker would leave her alone. When she didn't see the car anymore, she drove home. However, she soon saw the car again, so she returned to the police station parking lot and waited in her car for a while before driving home. Lori initially thought it was a prank, but she didn't report the incident to the police. On January 5th, Lori and her friend Jody arrived at the college for a dance team rehearsal. Lori recognized the same light blue car that had been following her, and she saw the driver, 23-year-old Justin Thurber, who was a local resident. Although Lori didn't know Justin personally, she had seen him with his older brother and friends before. After practice, Lori and Jody planned to meet up later, but Jody never showed up. It was then revealed that several dance team members had also seen Justin lurking around the college campus that week. In the initial stages of the investigation into Jody's disappearance, police searched the city thoroughly, but couldn't find her car within the first 24 hours. The city of Arkansas is surrounded by open fields and wooded areas, making it a challenging task. To aid their search, authorities brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to scour the region from above. They hoped to spot Jody's car, which was larger and easier to detect than a person. The police investigation revealed that the last signal from Jody's cell phone was received from a tower near the Caw Wildlife Area, a vast wooded region along the Arkansas River. At this point, only one suspect had emerged, Justin Eugene Justin, identified by Lori Leglighter and other members of the dance group. Notably, Justin was already familiar to the police due to a prior incident in 2004 when he was charged with illegal possession of banned substances despite his young age. Justin was sentenced but didn't serve time in prison. Instead, he was released. However, just 3 months later, he was arrested again for stealing in Probate Nation, violating his probation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months after that, he was arrested for petty theft and found with illegal drugs. Then, on December 31, 2006, just 6 days before Jody's disappearance, Justin was arrested for theft once more. After posting a $3,000 bail, Justin was freed on New Year's Eve. The very next day, January 1st, he pretended to be a police officer, causing a public disturbance. When the real police arrived, Justin claimed to have chest pain and was taken to the hospital rather than the police station. It's unclear why he wasn't arrested after being discharged from the hospital, and it's also unclear how he managed to avoid consequences for his actions. A family tie to Cowley County Police might have influenced events. On January 6th, an officer spotted Justin's Cadillac at his parents' house and initiated a conversation. Justin's father invited the officer in. When questioned about his previous day's whereabouts, Justin said he drove to Winfield, 13 miles outside Arkansas City that morning. In Winfield, Justin met up with a friend and 2 acquaintances of his friend, whom he didn't know well. The 4 of them then drove around the countryside in one of the acquaintances' cars until it became stuck on a dirt road near Cedar Vale. Justin claimed that he proceeded to walk towards Arkansas City, a 30-mile journey from Cedar Vale. After 6 hours of walking, he grew tired and called his father to come pick him up. Justin's father backed his son's story, saying he'd picked him up near Cowley State Fishing Lake, where Justin was wet and dirty. The officer found the story unconvincing, but lacked evidence to charge him, so let him go. That evening, police questioned Alexis Schwartzel, who had recently ended her 3-year relationship with Justin Thurber. When informed about the investigation into Jody Sanderholm's disappearance, Alexis was shocked. She revealed that Justin had once told her that he had been watching Jody since he was 13 years old, often sneaking peeks at her while she swam in her backyard pool, and even peered through her bedroom window, waiting for her to change clothes. Alexis explained that she had broken up with Justin due to his abusive behavior and increasing strange tendencies. She recalled that during intimate moments, he would choke her until she lost consciousness. Moreover, he would ask her to fight him, as it was the only way he could become aroused. The police grew increasingly suspicious of Justin's involvement in Jody's disappearance, despite lacking concrete evidence. Nonetheless, Justin was arrested later that evening, on January 6th. Detective Eric Mata arrested Justin Thurber for bail violation and criminal trespassing because Justin was found on the college campus, which the detective believed he was not supposed to be on. Justin requested to speak with his lawyer when arrested. Around the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. During the search, the officers took Justin's shoes, which were wet and drying on a towel. His father had helped him clean the mud from the shoes. The clothes he wore when his father picked him up were also found, but Justin had already washed them. On January 7th, rugged terrain search teams combed the Caw wildlife area for Jody Sanderholm, finding shoe prints matching Justin's and smaller ones. They stopped for the night, resuming the search the next day. En route home, searchers checked Cowley County State Fishing Lake, recalling Justin was wet when picked up by his father. Near a public restroom, investigators discovered several important pieces of evidence. This included a muddy tire track, shoe prints with mud on them, and a portable toilet containing a handwritten note addressed to the parents of Jody Sanderholm. In another toilet, they found dance shoes and a flip-flop sandal that matched the footprints found at the Caw wildlife area. Further searches yielded a collection of personal belongings, including cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet with Jody's driver's license and social security card, a black leotard, a tigerette jacket with her first name on it, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. Search efforts focused on Cowley County State Fishing Lake and the Caw wildlife area. On January 9th, specialists used sonar to locate Jody's submerged car. Tragically, her body was found later that day, hidden under debris. DNA evidence linked Justin Thurber to the car and body, but water in the car likely destroyed additional evidence. Forensic investigators found crucial evidence after many hours of work. A hair on Jody's car seat was matched to Justin Thurber through mitochondrial DNA testing. Private DNA expert Barbara Leal analyzed samples from Jody's arm and chest. It was possible that Justin was involved. Cell tower data showed Jody's and Justin's phones were in the same area simultaneously. This was corroborated by Jody's friend Lori, who saw Justin in the college parking lot that day. Security footage confirmed Lori's account, showing Justin following Jody in his Cadillac. Investigators believe that Justin followed Jody from college to her home, where he attacked her after she retrieved letters from the mailbox. A shoe print identical to Justin's sneakers was found by the mailbox, supporting this theory. Footprints matching Justin's shoes were discovered at the Caw Wildlife Area, and smaller prints matched Jody's shoes found at the lake, along with her other belongings. In the preserve, searchers found footprints of Justin and Jody side by side, indicating they walked together at one point. However, Jody's footprint stopped and Justin's continued deeper into the woods, so he carried her further on his own. His shoe prints were also found near where the body was discovered. Moreover, the three people Justin claimed to have been with on the day of Jody's disappearance denied his story, revealing that his alibi about getting stuck near Cedar Vale was a lie. The police drove Justin to Cedar Vale to verify his alibi, but he couldn't pinpoint the location where he claimed his car was stuck. Back at the police station, Justin agreed to take a polygraph test and requested that his relative, Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The collected evidence was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. Despite his denial of guilt, the judge set his bail at $1 million. Justin's lawyers attempted to argue that he was mentally incompetent, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Given that Justin had graduated from high school and attended college, the judge deemed the defense's claim of mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy testified in court, describing the brutal nature of Jody's last hours. Her body and face were covered in bruises and abrasions, with clear signs of strangulation on her neck, which was ultimately determined to be the cause of her death. Here's what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. The crime was driven by sexual desire and involved an object, a stick. To give you an idea of what happened at the wildlife area without going into detail, it's worth noting that not all violent criminals are as brutal as Justin. At Justin's trial, 7 women, including his ex-girlfriend, testified that they had been stalked by him. One of these women was a co-worker who was so afraid of Justin that she had to have a police officer escort her to her car after work because she had seen him waiting for her earlier. He had left a disturbing gift on her car, a rose, and a note saying he was interested in her. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Jody Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Carrie Morris, a friend of Jody's, saw Jody sitting in the passenger seat of her car as they drove past each other in Arkansas City around noon. Morris noticed that the driver was a large man. She tried to call Jody's cell phone, but there was no answer. Later that day, around 3 p.m., 2 other women reported seeing a car that looked similar to Jody's on a dirt road south of Arkansas City. One of the women identified the driver as Justin in court. After a trial, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict on February 17, 2009, finding Justin guilty on all counts. They recommended that he be sentenced to death. Justin's lawyer attempted to negotiate a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, but Jody's family opposed it. The judge ultimately sentenced Justin to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, Kansas expanded its stalking laws, increasing police authority and the definition of stalking behaviors. Since his sentencing, Justin Thurber has continued to appeal the court's decision. His lawyers are now arguing that he has a mental disability, which they claim is supported by evidence from 2018. However, the Kansas Supreme Court has put his death sentence on hold, citing a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. that prohibits the execution of individuals with developmental disabilities, even if they are mild. Justin was found competent at his original trial. Years later, Jody's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, attended a hearing and was outraged that Justin had written letters to girls while in prison, seeing it as proof of his competency. Justin is currently appealing a death sentence, and a 2020 state law gives him the opportunity to request an attorney to assist with post-conviction DNA testing from the Cali County District Court. This is significant because, despite it being 16 years since Jody Sanderholm's murder, the case is still not fully resolved. Additionally, the speaker believes that Jody pleaded for her life, but Justin did not spare her, denying her a second chance. Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994, but no one has been executed since then. In fact, the last execution in Kansas took place in 1965. Since the reinstatement, 10 people, including Justin, have been sentenced to death, but none of their sentences have been carried out. According to Adam Fan and Steele, spokesperson for the Kansas Department of Corrections, there are no plans for future executions. Jennifer Aldridge, Jody's sister, finds it surprising that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago without a plan for carrying out executions. She believes this issue should have been discussed when the penalty was reinstated. Even if Justin's death sentence is upheld, it is likely that it will not be carried out. Justin Thurber is currently being held at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a 2014 report by the Kansas Legislative Post-Audit Committee, it costs almost $49,000 per year to keep an inmate in administrative segregation at El Dorado. Furthermore, it's not just the cost of housing a death row inmate. It's also 4 times more expensive to prosecute a case where the death penalty is sought by the prosecution. The Sanderholms feel that paying taxes is an additional unfair burden on top of the emotional pain they're already enduring as they wait for justice in their daughter Jody's case. Brian Sanderholm explained, "Every week, when I see the taxes deducted from my paycheck, it's a painful reminder that I'm supporting the person responsible for our suffering." His wife Cindy echoed his sentiments, saying, "He deserves the maximum punishment, which is what the law intended. We need to reform the law so it can be enforced effectively." If you were in our shoes, what would you want to happen to someone who harmed your child? Cynthia Ann Sanderholm, Jody's mother, sadly passed away on December 2, 2022, at the age of 63. The case of Amber Belkin. Amber Marie Belkin was born on December 6, 1981, in San Antonio. As an only child, her parents described her as energetic, ambitious, and responsible. For almost 3 years, Amber worked as a manager at the video game store. On January 29th, she was scheduled to work another shift. The store was set to open at 10 a.m., but Amber always arrived at 9 a.m. to prepare. Part of her routine involved taking the previous day's earnings from the safe and depositing them at the adjacent bank to avoid accumulating large sums of money in the store. On a January day, Amber arrived at work around 9 a.m. as usual. The store, part of a large international chain, was supposed to open at 10 a.m. However, by noon, Amber still hadn't opened the store or deposited the money, which raised concerns. In addition, she wasn't answering phone calls. The regional manager asked the manager of another San Antonio store, Mariano Rivera, to investigate why Amber hadn't deposited the money and why the store remained closed. When Rivera arrived, he saw a white car similar to Amber's parked outside. The store entrance was locked, and he couldn't see anyone inside. After knocking on the door without getting a response, he left. About 2 hours later, Rivera returned to check on the store again. This time, he spotted Amber's assistant, Brandon, through the window. Rivera knocked on the door, and Brandon let him in. Rivera asked Brandon if he had seen Amber, but Brandon said he hadn't. Brandon mentioned that he had just arrived and noticed something strange. Money, CDs, and work documents were scattered all over the floor. Rivera entered the back room and made a horrifying discovery. The lifeless body of Amber lay on the floor, face down, with a plastic bag over her head. Forensic experts later determined that the cause of her death was strangulation. Rivera immediately called 911, and the police soon cordoned off the store. Detectives found that Amber had not delivered money to the bank, as she normally would, and the store's safe was empty, suggesting that a robbery had taken place and gone wrong. It's possible that the robbers stumbled upon Amber and decided to eliminate her as a witness. Based on Amber's schedule, the crime was determined to have occurred between 9 and 10 a.m. Unfortunately, the store lacked surveillance cameras, which could have greatly aided the investigation. As a result, the police had to rely on other clues. First, detectives interviewed Mariano Rivera and Brandon Beal, the two individuals who stumbled upon the body. They recounted how they arrived at the store and the circumstances surrounding their discovery of Amber's lifeless body. Store management reported to the authorities that the safe had been robbed of approximately $2,000 and several items were missing, including a few video game CDs and 3 or 4 PlayStation consoles. The total damages to the store amounted to $6,000. The police also questioned employees from neighboring establishments, but their efforts yielded no valuable information, as no one claimed to have seen or heard anything unusual. Meanwhile, as the police investigated the crime scene, news of the incident spread rapidly throughout San Antonio, and the parking lot in front of the store became flooded with media representatives. Amber's father, Randy Belkin, was watching the news when he heard about the incident. The address of the store where the crime occurred caught his attention, so he immediately got in his car and drove there. When he arrived, he spoke to a detective who broke the devastating news that the victim was his daughter. This event had a profound impact on Randy, dividing his life into 2 distinct periods, before and after. Soon, Amber's mother, Lelia, arrived at the store. She looked into her husband's eyes and understood the unthinkable. Their only child was gone. The detectives examined the crime scene and concluded that the criminal had escaped through the back door, which explained why no one had seen him. Their main finding was that the criminal must have been familiar with the store's schedule, knowing that the money was taken to the bank between 9 and 10 a.m., and that this particular store didn't have surveillance cameras. This level of knowledge suggested that the criminal was likely a former or current employee of the company. The initial suspect in Amber's disappearance was Brandon Beal, her store assistant. He was familiar with the store's operations and was already on the premises when a manager from another location arrived to check on Amber. Brandon had arrived at work to find the store still closed, despite it being several hours past the opening time. Using his key, he entered the store and relocked the door. Upon entering, he noticed signs of a struggle, but curiously, he didn't investigate the back room to check on Amber's whereabouts or well-being. Further investigation revealed that Amber, as the store manager, had been dissatisfied with Brandon's performance and wanted him fired. She had confided in her mother that Brandon had a short temper and struggled to fulfill his job responsibilities. The question detectives sought to answer was whether Brandon's disagreements with Amber could have driven him to commit a crime. After receiving a warrant, officers searched Brandon's car and home in an effort to locate the stolen CDs and PlayStation consoles from the store. However, they did not find any of the missing items. During the interrogation, Brandon explained that he arrived at the store around 2 p.m. and was surprised to find it still closed. He claimed that he let himself in using his key, as he didn't think Amber could be inside. Upon seeing the mess, he assumed the store had been robbed and was shortly followed by the manager from another location. Brandon also admitted that he was unaware of Amber's intention to fire him, although he acknowledged that they often disagreed on certain issues. His girlfriend and parents corroborated his alibi for the morning of the crime, and after successfully passing a lie detector test, he was cleared as a suspect. Almost a month had passed since Amber's death. but the police still had no new leads. The detectives were worried that the case would go cold. Desperate for a breakthrough, Amber's parents reached out to the public through the media, pleading with anyone who knew anything about the incident to come forward. They offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest, with $95,000 of that amount provided by Amber's employer. Flyers with her picture were posted throughout San Antonio. Yet despite these efforts, there was no progress for the next 7 months. Then, suddenly, a police station received a crucial call. A man identifying himself as Joe told the detective handling Amber's case that he knew who was responsible for her murder. Joe claimed that 22-year-old Giovanni Rivera was the killer. When the detective asked why he thought so, Joe explained that he and Giovanni had worked with Amber at the same company. On the day of the crime, Giovanni had called him, asking if he wanted to take part in a robbery. Joe revealed that the targeted store, Choice, was no accident. Giovanni had chosen it because it lacked surveillance cameras. The detective asked Joe if he had accepted the offer and participated in the robbery, but Joe denied it. If everything said so far is true, the police's initial theory that the crime was committed by someone familiar with the store's schedule is likely correct. The detective asked Joe to come to the police station to make a formal statement, but Joe refused. However, 2 days later, Joe voluntarily went to the station and maintained his innocence in the robbery. During the questioning, Joe detailed how Giovanni Rivera first discussed robbing a store. Joe claimed that Giovanni never mentioned harming Amber. But about a month after Amber's death, which had received widespread media attention, Giovanni confessed to Joe that he was responsible for her death. Joe explained that he didn't immediately report Giovanni because he feared for his safety. The $100,000 reward for providing crucial information might have encouraged Joe to come forward sooner. Joe claimed that his growing sense of guilt eventually outweighed his fear, prompting him to contact the police. Although Joe's testimony alone wasn't enough to secure an arrest warrant for Giovanni Rivera, it led the detective to call Giovanni in for questioning. Interestingly, Giovanni Rivera and Mariano Rivera, the manager who discovered the body, are simply namesakes with no family connection. During a conversation with the detective, Rivera claimed that Joe was lying and asserted he was not involved in any criminal activity. However, at a certain point, he declined to answer further questions, and the police were forced to release him. As the officers pondered how to bring him to justice, Giovanni relocated to Laredo, Texas, with his family. Being a border city with Mexico, there was a significant risk that he would cross the border and disappear. In the absence of substantial evidence, detectives were unable to take any action, and the case remained stagnant for months. Fortunately, help arrived unexpectedly at the end of June 2008, nearly a year and a half after Amber's tragic death. It was Veronica, Giovanni's wife, who reached out to the police. In her distress call, she revealed that her husband had attacked her, threatening her and their kids with a pistol. Moreover, she courageously implicated Giovanni in Amber Belkin's murder. The detective in charge of the case traveled to Laredo to interview Veronica in person. During their meeting, Veronica shared her regret over marrying Giovanni, citing that she had made a poor decision. She had become pregnant with his child while still in school, and her family had pressured them into getting married. However, after the wedding, Giovanni's true nature unfolded. He transformed into a tyrant. Veronica alleged that if she refused his advances, he would restrain her with duct tape. She also disclosed that when Giovanni was first called to the police station, he returned home agitated and abruptly instructed her that they needed to relocate to Laredo. That same day, they hastily packed their essentials and left San Antonio behind. Veronica realized that if her husband was exonerated, they wouldn't have to relocate. One day, she mustered the courage to ask Giovanni directly if he was responsible for Amber Belkin's death, and to her horror, he confessed to taking Amber's life. Stunned, Veronica demanded to know why he did it. Giovanni's response was that their family desperately needed the money to pay the rent. When Veronica subsequently asked for a divorce, Giovanni became violent, forcing her into a car and driving her to a remote location. There, he pulled out a pistol and threatened her. He then coerced her into performing sexual acts against her will. Afterward, he removed her from the car, handed her the gun, and instructed her to kill him. Veronica categorically refused, prompting Giovanni to threaten retaliation against their children and relatives if she didn't comply. Veronica pleaded with Giovanni to consider the fate of their children if they were left parentless, and her words seemed to have an impact. That evening, they both returned home, but the next morning, Giovanni threatened to vanish. As soon as Veronica drove away, she contacted the police and reported her husband's admission of guilt. The authorities obtained an arrest warrant for Giovanni, but he managed to escape across the border into Mexico. It took 6 weeks of searching before he was finally apprehended at a relative's residence. The Mexican authorities agreed to hand him over to the U.S., but only on the condition that the prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. During questioning, Giovanni confessed to the murder of Amber Belkin. He explained that as soon as Amber opened the store door, he followed her, wearing gloves and a mask. Amber recognized him, and he told her he was in financial trouble and needed money. He forced her to open the safe, and when she attempted to reach the phone, he bound her hands with duct tape. Amber panicked, screaming, and Giovanni covered her mouth, asking her to remain quiet. Realizing he had gone too far, he placed a plastic bag over her head, asphyxiating her until she stopped breathing. He then stole the money, some CDs, and PlayStation consoles before driving away. After a prolonged and challenging process, the district attorney's office finally agreed to a plea bargain. In April 2010, Giovanni Rivera was subsequently sentenced to life in prison, with the stipulation that he must serve at least 30 years behind bars before he can be considered for parole. Amber's loved ones and friends vowed to do everything within their power to guarantee that he remains incarcerated for the rest of his life. The case of Sumner family. James and Carol Alford, also known as Reggie and Sunar, grew up together in Charleston, South Carolina. They were the same age, attended the same school, and were in the same grade. As they grew older, their childhood friendship blossomed into romance. By the time they were 15, they had started dating and were inseparable. Their friends thought they made a beautiful couple, and James and Carol kept photos of their happy early years in their archives. They dreamed of a long, happy life together and planned to get married as soon as they turned 18. Their parents approved of their relationship and supported their decision. However, their plans were put on hold when James was called up for military service in the Army. They decided to postpone their wedding until his return and exchanged regular letters. But as time passed, James was sent to Vietnam, and contact with him was lost. Carol didn't know if he was alive, as he stopped writing to her. Carol continued her studies and got a job at the Charleston Air Force Base. She married twice, first in the late 1960s, but that marriage ended quickly and she had no children. In 1975, she married Richard Alford, with whom she had a daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. But her second marriage was also troubled, as her husband abused her and their daughter. In the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer tolerate the abuse and filed for divorce, taking her daughter with her. But Richard continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, he attacked her, shooting her several times in front of their 10-year-old daughter. Carol was lucky to survive, thanks to her neighbors who called for help. She underwent multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, and eventually recovered, although she lost sight in one eye and was left disabled. Her health began to deteriorate again in the late 1990s, and after a series of tests, she was diagnosed with liver cancer. In 1987, Carol's life was in danger due to medical complications, and she unknowingly contracted the hepatitis C virus. Over time, the virus damaged her liver, leading to cancer. Fortunately, with proper treatment and therapy, her condition stabilized. However, she had to take daily medications and undergo regular checkups for the rest of her life. The hepatitis C diagnosis, combined with previous severe gunshot wounds, made it impossible for her to work physically demanding jobs. She eventually found work as a call center operator. Meanwhile, James, her high school sweetheart, had a traumatic experience in Vietnam. He was severely wounded and mistakenly reported dead. He survived and returned home, but lost contact with Carol. Years later, James married, but the marriage ended and he was left alone, struggling with chronic health issues. In 2000, Carol received a call at work from a familiar voice, James. She was hesitant to believe it was really him, as she thought he had died in the war. The two cried and reminisced, eventually agreeing to meet in person. After 38 years apart, they reunited and rekindled their romance. Carol and James started seeing each other daily and soon decided to move in together. They got married 5 months later and lived in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina. Despite their health issues, they were happy and took care of each other. They lived near the Cole family, who had their own set of troubles, including Stephen, a Vietnam veteran confined to a wheelchair, and his wife Natalie, who often spent time with friends in bars. Tiffany, the daughter of James's ex, was often left to fend for herself from a young age. She would hang out on the streets with no money, not even for small treats. When James and Carol started living together, Tiffany was still in high school. Carol, being kind-hearted, sympathized with the girl who was unwanted by her own mother. For 5 years, Carol looked out for Tiffany like a daughter, inviting her to family meals, buying her clothes, and giving her money for expenses. In 2004, when the Summers decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumino minivan, Tiffany asked to buy it in installments since she had no money and desperately needed a car. The Summers agreed to sell it to her for a very low price, divided into 12 payments over a year. In early 2005, the Summers were forced to move to Florida due to their deteriorating health. Doctors recommended a warmer climate, so they sold their Charleston home and bought a new one in Jacksonville, along with a Lincoln Town car. They were happy in their new home, making plans for their future. Every day, Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda, sharing her thoughts and plans. But one day in June 2005, Carol didn't call, and Rhonda couldn't reach her. Rhonda was worried, but hoped everything was okay. The next day, there was still no answer. Rhonda called her mother's and James's cell phones every half hour, but they were unavailable, and the answering machine remained unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda drove to Florida to check on her mother and stepfather. When she arrived, she noticed the car was missing, the front door was open, and the house was in disarray. There was a table set for dinner, but the food was 3 days old. It looked like the owners had abruptly left in the middle of a meal. Rhonda saw medications, including her mother's cancer pills and James's insulin, on the bedside table. The cell phones were dead. Rhonda realized her mother and stepfather couldn't have left without their medications and phones, so she contacted the police to report the incident. The police put out a wanted list for the Summers car, blocked their bank cards, and began searching for them. The first few days yielded no results, but on June 12th, a man called a bank, claiming to be James Schur, complaining that his card was blocked. This led the police to investigate further. The bank employee became suspicious when checking the card information and offered Mr. Schur to visit the nearest branch to resolve the issue, but he hung up. Shortly after, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carol Schur, and reported a similar problem with her blocked card. When asked to visit the bank in person, she refused, citing health issues, and asked to regain access to her savings, which was denied. The bank immediately handed over the call recordings and information to the police. When played to Rhonda, the couple's daughter, she confirmed that the voices did not belong to her parents, who were in their 60s, while the callers sounded much younger. The police suspected that the imposters were involved in the couple's disappearance either holding them captive or killing them after obtaining bank account information. A few days later, the couple's abandoned car was found on a deserted road with no signs of struggle or blood inside. However, hair and sweat marks from both spouses were found in the trunk, suggesting they were taken away in their own car. Further investigation revealed that money had been withdrawn from their accounts after their disappearance, and ATM footage showed a young man making the withdrawals. The police traced the calls made from the imposter's number and found that the SIM card was purchased shortly before the couple's disappearance. A call was made to a car rental company where a Mazda RX-8 was rented under the name Tiffany Cole. The same car was used to withdraw money from the couple's accounts. Using the car's built-in tracking device, the police located the Mazda RX-8 at a hotel in Charleston. A team was sent to apprehend the suspects, who were found celebrating in their hotel room, surrounded by packages and receipts from lavish purchases. The three suspects, Tiffany Cole, Michael J. Jackson, and Alan Lindell Wade, were taken into custody and questioned separately. Initially, they feigned ignorance or remained silent, but after several hours of interrogation and presentation of evidence, Tiffany confessed to robbing the elderly couple and using their stolen money to fund their lifestyle. Tiffany and her new boyfriend stayed overnight at the Summers house, where they were treated to dinner and hospitality. During the meal, Carol Summers mentioned that they had almost $100,000 in savings, which sparked an idea in Tiffany's mind. That night, Tiffany and her boyfriend began making plans to get their hands on the money. They enlisted the help of two accomplices, Bruce and Alan, and started putting their plan into action. On June 6th, Tiffany rented a car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to a deserted spot in the woods and began digging a grave for the Summers. On July 8th, Tiffany bought rope and duct tape, which she gave to Bruce and Alan. That evening, they approached the Summers house, pretending to need help and asking to use their phone. Carol, feeling sorry for them, let them in. Once inside, Bruce and Alan attacked the Summers, binding their hands and feet with duct tape and blindfolding them. They questioned the couple about their money and valuables, threatening them with torture and death. The Summers gave in, hoping to spare their lives. As soon as the attackers got the information they needed, 2 more accomplices arrived, helping to drag the Summers out to their car. They drove the car to the woods, with Tiffany and her boyfriend following behind in a second car. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm and remove the duct tape from his and his wife's faces. But it was too late. The car stopped, and the Summers were led to the grave, where they were pushed to their deaths. The elderly couple pleaded for their lives, but the young criminals showed no mercy, brutally killing them by burying them alive. According to Bruce, the perpetrators covered the bound couple with earth for about an hour, during which time the victims cried, confessed their love for each other, and said goodbye. The autopsy later revealed that the couple died of suffocation, with pieces of soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs. After committing the heinous crime, the criminals abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They broke into the Summers house, stealing valuable items, and then returned to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their celebration was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all 4 perpetrators were arrested 4 days later. The trial and conviction followed. Bruce Nixon, who had fully admitted his guilt and cooperated with the investigation, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Tiffany Cole, who claimed she was not directly involved in the murder, was given the death penalty, along with Jackson and Lindell, who had chosen to remain silent. The evidence against them, including Tiffany's involvement in the criminal plan, renting a car, and participating in the grave digging, was overwhelming. The 4 criminals appealed their sentences multiple times, but they were all denied. Although Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell were sentenced to death, the penalty was never carried out, even 18 years after their atrocious crime. The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a loving family where she was especially close to her sister. In high school, she met Mike, and a few years later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in a quiet Houston suburb where they soon started a family with the birth of their daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they welcomed a son. At just 27 years old, Kathy was now a mother of 2. After her second child was born, Kathy dedicated herself to full-time motherhood, focusing on raising her children. Mike worked at his father-in-law's small sign factory, providing a stable income for the family. Kathy's parents also offered financial support, enabling her to devote all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with the children as usual, while Mike was at work. After his shift ended, he decided to meet up with friends and headed to a bar. Mike attempted to call his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer, a rare occurrence, as Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, Mike called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but received no answer. Peering through the living room window, he noticed the TV was on, so he persisted in knocking, but there was only silence. Tim's concern grew that something might have happened to Kathy. Rather than returning home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes of driving, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, requesting they check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Upon entering the house, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa, unconscious and displaying visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, the officers found the younger child in his crib, safe and unharmed. However, in another room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Kathy lay on the floor, bloodied and lifeless. She was naked, and the police quickly determined that she was the victim of a heinous crime. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord, a disturbing indicator of the brutality she had endured. The paramedics rushed Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began meticulously examining the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived shortly after, but the police withheld the details of the tragedy from him. Instead, they requested that he go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she awoke. As Kathy's father waited at the hospital, he was shocked to learn about his daughter's murder from a news report on TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police were immediately struck by his suspicious behavior. Not only did he show up late, but there were also telltale bloodstains on his shirt. The police asked him to surrender his clothes and answer their questions, their scrutiny intensifying with each passing moment. Investigators made several intriguing discoveries. Firstly, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had lingered in the house for some time, rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. Secondly, forensic experts detected no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors, except the front door, were locked, implying that Kathy either let the attacker in voluntarily or they had a key. The police also observed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor beside her body. This not only hinted at the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had taken the time to fold her clothes with such care. The detectives hypothesized that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to comply with their demands. Kathy may have acquiesced to their demands solely to protect her children, only to be killed afterwards. Kathy's daughter was fighting for her life after being brutally beaten, likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she fell into a coma, and her chances of survival remained dire. Medical experts examined Kathy's body and determined that she had suffered 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdominal area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and managed to extract biological material from the perpetrator. However, during that time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science, so the experts could only determine the perpetrator's blood type. From the early hours of the investigation, the police zeroed in on the victim's husband, Mike, after noticing suspicious stains on his shirt. They seized his clothing for examination, and Mike's behavior that evening also raised eyebrows. After work, he went out with friends, but instead of going home, he asked a neighbor, Tim, to check on his wife, a tactic detectives had seen before, where a husband committed the murder and created an alibi. The police also uncovered that Mike had a checkered past. Right after high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover cop and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, although he only served 2 before being released on parole. Later, he married Kathy, but the police needed more evidence to charge him. The detectives also launched an investigation into Tim, the neighbor, whose behavior seemed suspicious. Rather than calling the police from his home, he drove around town searching for patrol officers. A search of Tim's car revealed suspicious stains on the floor mats that resembled blood. Forensic experts determined that Kathy's death had occurred around 10 p.m., approximately 6 hours before her body was discovered. This led the detectives to probe the suspect's whereabouts long before the evening and their actions after the murder. Both Mike and Tim claimed to have been at work, prompting the police to verify their alibis. 2 days after the murder, the hospital contacted the detectives with a breakthrough. Kathy's daughter had suddenly regained consciousness, and her life was no longer in danger. Investigators rushed to interview her, hoping she could provide insight into the events, but the 4-year-old girl had almost completely lost her memory of that day. She vaguely recalled a man with light hair entering their house, though both her father and Tim had dark hair. The detectives received an unexpected update from the lab, forcing them to reassess the case. The experts' analysis revealed that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were mere machine oil, and those on the husband's shirt were just paint. Furthermore, multiple colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked in different fields, corroborated that the 2 men had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until evening. This eliminated both men as suspects, as they hadn't had the opportunity to commit the crime at Kathy's house. The police, who had been convinced of one of the suspects' involvement, found themselves back at the starting point. They refocused on other potential suspects familiar with the victim and capable of entering her house without raising suspicions. As detectives questioned Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might be responsible, they discovered an intriguing pattern. Many of them, without hesitation, named one person, Greg. Greg, Kathy's brother-in-law, was flagged as a suspect due to his troublesome behavior, which her loved ones revealed she had frequently complained about. According to Kathy, Greg would openly flirt with her and persistently try to persuade her into intimate encounters. Moreover, he would often make inappropriate remarks about her stomach, a detail that aligned with the majority of stab wounds being located in that area. The police investigation uncovered Greg's history of illegal substance abuse and criminal past, prompting detectives to focus on him. They soon found a promising lead, a fingerprint and hair at Kathy's house matching Greg's. However, this evidence was not conclusive, as Greg regularly visited Kathy and her husband, potentially leaving behind the prints and hair prior to the murder. Kathy's parents were convinced of Greg's guilt. Her mother shared a telling anecdote. During a late-night hospital visit with her granddaughter, Greg appeared, causing the girl to glance at her grandmother with an unmistakable look of fear. After hearing this testimony, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He categorically denied any involvement in the murder, claiming to have been with a friend at the time, a friend with a notable criminal record. Mid-interrogation, Greg requested a brief absence to pay for additional parking time, allegedly to avoid a ticket, but he never returned to the station. Greg's wife's sister later recounted that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., leaving him a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder, providing a plausible opportunity to kill Kathy. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the police still lacked concrete evidence to link Greg to the crime. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body. At the time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of the sample's owner. The blood type of the sample from Kathy's body matched Greg's, but this finding did not conclusively prove his guilt. Investigators were unable to make an arrest based on the available evidence, prompting a continued search for additional proof. However, despite their efforts, they were ultimately unable to prove Greg's involvement. The case eventually stalled, leaving Kathy's family frustrated and convinced of Greg's guilt, yet powerless to act. Meanwhile, Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to accept that her husband was capable of such a heinous crime and chose to continue living with him in the years that followed. Detectives revisited the case in 1998, 11 years after the murder, seeking DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they only got a partial DNA profile, which showed Greg belonged to the 2% of the population matching it. When questioned, Greg changed his story, claiming a consensual relationship with Kathy, but detectives were skeptical, knowing such shifts are common in murder cases. Despite suspicions, they couldn't convict without a full DNA match, and the case went cold again. In 2002, detectives revived the investigation, enlisting the expertise of forensic scientist Catherine Long, a pioneer in DNA research. She and her team aimed to determine whether a perpetrator's DNA could linger on the victim's body after strangulation, and if so, whether it could be extracted for analysis. To test this theory, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation, squeezing each other's necks, and then collected samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were striking. Even brief contact left behind sufficient skin particles for DNA analysis. Detectives re-examined Kathy's case, focusing on the lamp cord used to bind her hands. Since only the killer could have tightened it, they handed it over to Catherine for DNA analysis. Stored in a paper bag, the cord was swabbed from end to end, including blood-stained areas. 2 DNA profiles emerged, Kathy's and Greg's, providing strong evidence that Greg was the killer. 15 years after the murder, the suspect was arrested and denied involvement, claiming a romantic relationship with Kathy. However, DNA evidence led to his trial. While in prison, his cellmate reported that Greg confessed to the crime, boasting about killing Kathy after she resisted his advances and threatening to harm her son if she didn't comply. The detectives were convinced of the cellmate's veracity, given that he couldn't have possibly divined so many crucial details, even if he had carefully read about the case in the news. Empowered by the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time, he finally broke down and confessed. He acknowledged his guilt in Kathy's murder, repeating the same admission he had made to his cellmate. Subsequently, he pleaded guilty in court and was handed a 45-year prison sentence, though he ultimately served only 4 years before succumbing to liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, tragically didn't live to see the day of the killer's arrest, passing away at the age of 45. Her children and parents expressed gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, albeit 15 years later. Throughout that long and arduous wait, they had been almost certain that Greg was the perpetrator, yet they were forced to watch him continue living with their second daughter, powerless to intervene.